When things in our life fall into place, more often we know that it, whatever it is, was meant to be. Kepa's presence here and lecture topic this evening comes with this kind of flow. An inquiry about his cultural landscape reports here in Kahuahoike ended up with his acceptance to speak to us about his work with historical maps, documents, and images. Kepa was hanai'd by the Reverend Daniel Kahuahoike Sr. and Hattie Holohua. Their kupuna saw the kapu overthrown, says Kepā, a way of noting that his Hanai parents' lives, and thus his own, ran directly back to pre-missionary days. His own name, Kepa, was given to him by the Kahuahoikes. It means embrace or encircle. Hawaiians are the great embracers, Kepā says. They embrace freely, even in adversity. As a young child, Kepa would hear the old folks talk story and would hike all of Lanai to find what they were talking about. When he finished high school, Kepa left the home of his tutu papa and tutu mama, inventing a life commensurate with his childhood. Kepa served as the park naturalist at Kualoa Regional Park on Oahu, later at the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park as a specialist in cultural interpretation, a skill he took to positions at the Grand Canyon and Point Reyes National Seashore. He worked as a curator and exhibit designer for the Kauai Museum. Throughout these times, he continued learning from the Hawaiian elders, kupuna, to name a few, Auntie Maiki Lake, Tutu Hohila Kavelu, Auntie Lokalia Montgomery, and Mary Kavena Pukui. Kepa married Ona, Kavena Pukui's grandniece. He corrected me. There's a wonderful article in Hanaho magazine, Hawaiian in Flight. It says granddaughter, but Kepa says grandniece. And the two have been partners for over 30 years. When Kepa left his position at the Kauai Museum, he and Ona moved to Hawaii Island, created Kumu Pono Associates, a business offering research into the translation of Hawaiian documents, such as royal patent grants, land history records, and old Hawaiian language newspaper accounts. Your topic is so timely, Kepa, particularly given the growing success of the Reef Teach at Kahului Bay and the heiau restoration efforts embarked upon by the Kamehameha Investment Corporation. Your cultural landscape reports about Kahului continue to aid us in these efforts. The In-Flight magazine ends with your thoughts about making a difference together, about helping Lanai retain its place and spirit, and how kupuna had their reasons to talk stories and share, and that kupuna don't just teach to anybody. Mahalo nui for teaching us tonight.
Excuse me. Aloha.
Aloha.
Always embarrassing. But I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm humbled and honored, and I hope that in some small way it might be worth your time this evening. But I must tell you that we do indeed live in a place that is like no other on earth. And I believe today, that from the kupuna, they said there were no rights without, or pono, without first taking kuleana, responsibility. And so I think that if we choose to live here, particularly for those of us that are not of the koko, of the Hawaiian lineage, if we choose to live here, if we've taken the right to do so, we must also be responsible for it. And what I would like to do first, and this just comes from good kupuna teachings, I hope, is that I acknowledge some of our kupuna here. I see a few faces, actually several faces that I recognize, but one of our kupuna here who has graciously shared with me over several years of stories. Kupuna lili namako kaia ani o kang yai. Yeah. And kupuna ina hewa wau maka iana kuuaha e hui kala mai o iau. O wau ka opio o oi me na kupuna ia e na kumua. I'm not a source. My wife and I for years and years have said what we are simply the scribes. Those who hear the voices of the kupuna and those who hear the voices of those who have gone generations before us but chose to write their histories as an oral record passed down over the generations, indeed, I think, to inspire us. But I also need to ask you a couple of other things and share with you a couple of other thoughts before we go further. I see another auntie folks in here, and I'm not real kama'aina, but I want you to know that Tutu folks, no matter where we are, whether we're on the Ihau or here through Hawaii, they always taught us pule mua, pray first, noi mua, ask permission. Don't just assume that it's our right to step upon or to speak about. And so I ask you that we keep inside our na'au, because you know, Hawaiians, they feel from the na'au, from the gut, yeah? Us guys, we talk about, all my heart. We feel heart attack, heart murmur, ulcer, hypertension, mental dysfunction, But in the Hawaiians, it's in the gut. And it's important that we remember this and that in our gut, we keep things. Hawaiians have a beautiful word, many beautiful words, but these two. Na'au, literally your gut, yeah? Na'au means enlightened gut, wisdom, wise. Think about how the Hawaiian mind works just in these two words. Someone who is considered to be wise or enlightened is na'auao. Na'auao, N-A-A-U-A-O. An enlightened gut. Well, it sounds kind of, but the depth of it from the Hawaiian mind. Someone who is not enlightened or not wise and in fact acts in a way that we would call today ignorant, lack of care, is called na'aupo. Na'aupo, N-A-A-U-P-O. P-O is night, darkness, in blackness. I love the way that people think, yeah? Na'auau, na'aupo. I hope not to come to you as a na'aupo this evening. And so I ask the kupuna and the aunties and the uncles here, keep the good, set the bad aside. Tutu Papa taught me this early on. I think it's why I'm here today. Tutu Papa said, o ka mea mai ka I mālama, that which is good, keep. O ka mea me ke ole, e ho ka awale aku. That which isn't good, set it aside. Because when we hold on to these things, they start to churn, opu ke kewe, they churn, they start to sour our stomach, our na'au, and that's why we go into all those other things, the other dysfunctions that occur. So it's important that we learn to keep the good, set the bad aside. That doesn't mean we need to accept everything, but still, hana pono, yeah? This was Auntie's organization years ago when she was first working on issues relative to growth of Keauhou kahalu. Hana pono, do right, do good. So one of the sayings, and I share this with you, that comes from antiquity is "Aohe pau ka ike kahalau ho'okahi," that not all knowledge is found in one school. And I share this with you because, aunties, uncles, I may say something that is different than what you grew up learning. And I don't mean it as an offense. It's just that my school, where I come from, was different. And that's right, yeah? The Hawaiians, amazing. The nuances of the language. From island to island. Just incredible. The wealth that we have, is just amazing. And so Also, Hawaiians in this room today are the product of a group of survivors. Imagine that in 1778, when Captain James Cook arrived here and then visited Hawaii in early 1779, there were population estimates range from perhaps 500,000–600,000 to 1 million Hawaiians living here. In between 1803 and 1804, and again, remember there were a series of battles and wars and things. Lanai was at the short end of the Kamehameha stick, as an example. A number of things occurred, but by 1803, 1804, the first of the great epidemics came to Hawaii. And in 1 year's time, 175,000 Hawaiians died. In one epidemic. Ma'io ku'u, now believed to have been Asiatic cholera. When the missionaries arrived in 1820, and by 1823 when they began doing official census, the population from that great group of people that were here at the time of Cook's arrival was below 200,000 total. By 1893, at the time of the overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani, by a group of missionary descendants, businessmen, and with the help of American Marines. So if you hear Hawaiians talk about sovereignty issues, know that there's truth there, there's depth there. We need to address some of these matters because in 1893, they weren't invited to come. They came and took. There were only about 40,000 Hawaiians left at that time. That's striking. Out of a population, imagine, two handfuls. By the time of 1893, that's what was left out of every 10. So the knowledge that has been handed down over the generations is fragmented. In fact, an amazing collection of histories was compiled by a native historian of chiefly lineages tied to families of Kona. But his purpose in life, he was born and raised to be a steward of the Kamehameha children, a caretaker, a guardian of them. His name was John Papa'i'i. I'i, in the 1860s, began to chronicle, to write about facets of Hawaiian history. When Tutu Kabena and I connected, when I was privileged to sit at her feet and listen to her talk story, at one point I asked her, Tutu, pehe oiloa kela ano inoa, fragments of Hawaiian history, because we were talking about Papa'i'i's book. I said, how did you come up with this name, Fragments of Hawaiian History? And I was barely 20 at the time, and I asked, I almost didn't understand what it meant, And she said, na i'ino, kona ma'olelo, nahunahuno ka ma'olelo Hawaii. It was I'i himself who gave that name. His original title in the newspaper series in Keauhou was Nahunahuna, Fragments o ka Mo'olelo of the Traditions of Hawaii. So imagine if it was fragmented for John Papa'i'i in the 1860s, who was raised as an attendant of the Kamehameha children, saw the last human sacrifice at Papaenaheo on Leahi, Diamond Head, Oahu, traveled with Kamehameha, returning here to reside at Kamakahonu, witnessed the changes that occurred with the arrival of the missionaries, the Aikapu being cast over to Ainoa. Imagine if they were fragmented for him, how much more so for us in these days. So a really important thing is that we try whenever possible to speak what is Pono, what we know, or what has been handed down over the years from resources that we research. So what I'd like to do this evening is share with you some facets of that research, but I don't want to lecture at you. I hope that in a short while, relatively short, we will be able to talk story and answer questions. I don't believe that the typical kind of research that's done today, and I don't mean this in offense to anyone in here who might be involved with archaeological firms and doing what might be called ethnographic or anthropological research. I don't mean to offend you, but it's not enough to simply regurgitate what a few writers wrote before us, what people who look just like me, who have been writing about Hawaiian archaeology for the last 40, 50, or 60 years, have said, when we have an incredible resource of kupuna who were raised by their kupuna. Tutu Enti's kupuna were raised We're alive in attendance to King Kalakaua, folks. Right here at Po'o Hawaii, yeah? And it's so amazing. Those connections are real. They start to immediately connect us to a past that is lost except in their memories. The other part is that there are hundreds, over 100 Hawaiian language newspapers published between 1830s and 1948. Some of those papers ran for only a few issues and then were absorbed by other papers. Others, like Nupepaku Oko'a, was published for some 80 years before it, ended. Hawaiian people from the 1830s to the 1940s were writing not so we would forget, but so that we would remember and be connected to. And please, I don't, Mr. Chun and folks, I don't mean at all to be in an offense in this, but it's interesting that because of the Bishop Estate and then the Bishop Museum connections, but being from that lineage of the Kamehamehas, of course, the greatest work that has been done, say through Bishop Museum and was focusing on those writings of a few key writers that were tied to the Kamehameha household. And the only reason I bring that up is because besides the amazing works of John Papai'i, David Malo, born right here across from where Auntie herself was born, at Keauhou Bay, Sam Kamakau, as I said, John Papai'i, aside from those writings, are incredible stories. The personal experiences and lives of people that are known nowhere else unless we go to the native language newspapers. I'll share with you one quick example. If this story has different locations where it occurs, but because we're sitting in Kahalu'u, not Keauhou as I understand it, Polole, Kahalu'u no Keia, ai, aka kaino o ka hotelea o Keauhou, kuhiheva already. So, the next aina over is Keauhou 1, then Keauhou Nui or 2nd. On the boundary, I believe it is close to Keauhou 1st and 2nd, is a place in the Kula lands below the Mauka Road, but above the Makai Road, is a place called Pu'uokaloa. Well, here's an example of how people looked at the landscape and about the importance of hana pono, of doing right. There was a saying, a story handed down over the generations. If you were travel through this land, and you would call it at a Hawaiian house. And by the way, we probably all heard, that when Hawaiians, how they greet one another, mai, hele mai ai, come eat. Food is a great unifier, But at times in lands like this of Kona and through the Kekaha lands and even into the Konahema lands, water was a stress. Our water flows underground, not above ground, right? And so what happens is that when the kupuna would see someone come up and they would call, aloha mai, kapo'ioke hale. Hi, aloha oi. Yeah, how are you? Mai, aka, ni nau ka'uia oi. Come, but I have a question for you first. Ua ka'ua, I Pu'uokaloa. When the rains fell at Pu'uokaloa, ihea oi, where were you? If the response was, hikona ne, mawapo oi. I was in Kona, outside. You stay outside. But if the reply was, i Kohala, i Ka'u, i Hilo, aia makahiae, perhaps at a different place off island, mai, maloko mai oi, come on in. The idea was Hawaiians valued the ethic of work. Yeah? Even now at 81, Kupuna is working in her mala'ai. She's working on the land and caring for her kalo, her mai'a, the taros, the bananas, the pala'ai, the pumpkins and things like this. Even today, no need sit back. In fact, Kupuna tell us, mai kaula'i kalima ikala. Don't place the palm of your hand up into the sun. Huli kalima ilalo ahana. Turn the hand down and work. Aloa aoi ka'ai. Pololea. Aye. Turn the hand down, work with your hands. You will have food. Cindy Punihaule's father is an amazing man. Same idea. At 84, 85 now, this man is still out working his family's traditional land. Amazing. This is the ethic of the kupuna. So what I'm getting to is the idea for that old saying at Pu'uokaloa. If you are moloa, lazy, and only going house to house looking for food, you were to stay out. Go plant your own food, because the idea was when the rains fell at Pu'uokoloa, you knew it was time to plant your lowland crops down here. Plant and sustain yourself, then you don't need to go maha'oi. Kahihale, 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 right? That's how it was. And so, anyway, these are the kinds of things that I love for us to be able to connect and tie together as we look at the stories of the land. And what I want to do right now, I think, is take you on a little tour. I want to take you on a tour around Hawaii and some of the traditional places, the wahipana, the storied places, those traditional cultural properties, scenic landscapes. And by the way, just real quickly, and I know this is going to cause some people potential concern. Aloha. But, you know, Kupuna tell us the land is sacred, yeah? All land is sacred. So in our modern context, especially if we're trying to build something, well, God, if it's all sacred, is it all cheap? I mean, what's the division? The land is sacred. Our responsibility is to care for it and to figure out how best to ensure that our handprint, our footprint, isn't so destructive that it just, wipes out what came before. So we're going to be looking at some of the wahipana, the storied places, the sacred places of the land. Nahelehelena pana, the storied faces of the land. This little slideshow covers on things, and I'm sorry, I'm going to need to talk at it. Hano Hano Puni Haole is going to click slides as we go along a little bit. And I also have a collection of historic documents and maps that are later on in it. So we'll talk a little bit about what are some of the sources. If you're looking for land history, if you're looking for family histories, I would like to talk with you about some of those things so that we can try and figure it out. So we go Pio, the lights maybe a little bit if can, or is that it? Of course, Kona, a beautiful aina. We go next one. With Hualalai and its piko rising above you there. It's an incredible place. So already know that Hualalai is a sacred place. There's a story that says in one account that Hualalai was the wife and is named for the wife of an ancient chief by the name of Hawaii Loa. So what I love is amazing things like this. This is a mele that was found in a newspaper from 1865. In ways like that. Now, the mele has been lost, but Tutu Kawena told me if you stay within some basic traditional boundaries, give it life again. And how beautiful, yeah? So here it is, Hualalai, this beautiful mountain resting or standing in the calm of Kona. And when you're up at the summit, which was pictured a moment ago, you look down and you see Kahili Nai, which is right on the edge of Puana Hulu and Mea. Anai Ho'omalu, the Kohala boundary area. You look over to the side and you see Luahinewai as if it's boasting there. You know where Luahinewai is, huh? A wonderful storied place, just boasting there because of its water resources. And then from there you look to Kalai Mano, a famous place on the landscape here, and one seems to almost hear the sweet voice of, sweetly spreading out into the sea of Kumukea. And one might bathe in the water of Keauhou. Keauhou is a beautiful little pond right on the edge of Mahaiula, right on the point there. And so, this is the way Kupuna spoke about, and so we can go to the next slide, sorry. Spoke about the beauty of the land about them. So now, of course, in the uplands above us sit many famous places, as do places on the near shorelands. This is an early 1900, late 1880s photograph of Ahua Umi. Next, sorry. A later photograph, it looks basically just as it did back at that time. Many stories are told about it. In fact, a short distance from here, back towards the Kahaluu, upland Kahaluu section, is a place called Kahuahoike Kanaka, the level ground area where the men were called to show to be shown, to be enumerated. And one story tells us that these ahu are indeed a census of the Hawaiians during the time of Umi, being called together, family groups being called together to bring their stone to count and to take a census of the people of Hawaii. Near the area of Kahili-Na'i at Puana Hulu, the old Alapa'i homestead. Of course, we find that in Hawaiian history, before people, there were akua, the gods, creative forces of nature. Uaha nau kamoku. The island was born. It set off a little sprout, then it set off a taproot, then it sprouted forward, and it grew. Hawaii was the island. And so, we have these amazing stories. Kupuna always talk about tutu. Yeah? This woman, Pele, Kawahine ai honua, the woman who eats the earth. An amazing history and story tied to many families around Hawaii. And of course, here's a wonderful story. You see this fern? If you have this fern, if you happen to be living upslope a little ways, if you have this fern on your aina, don't wipe it all out. This fern called ama'u, or in clusters, ama'u-ma'u, is a body form of Kamapua'a. Lono is an important god of these lands. What is the name of the heiau? Just a short distance from here. There's a heiau that was a ho'olu'ai heiau, though, that was dedicated to the perpetuation of food growths. Lono folks came. And so when Lono comes from the south, with the pouring rains that give life to the land and cause the crops to grow, one of his forms was the pig, Pua'a, Kama Pua'a. So Pele is fire, as we saw a moment ago. Kama Pua'a is tied to the rains and the verdant forest growth. But he has many forms. In one of his forms, the Humuhumu Nukunukua Pua'a, he swims to Hawaii from Oahu. He lands along the Hamakua coast, and he begins in his large pig form to route Eku Kapua'a, to dig up, thus the deep valleys of the Hamakua Hilo coastline, Hilo Paliku, because in his large supernatural pig form he uproots, digs searching for food. But each time he goes down, Eku, He Uiki, Kanamaha, there's a glittering in his eyes. So he jumps back in the water, changes to his fish form, swims down, Eku, eating again, digging up the land. Finally, by the time he gets to Hilo One, notice there's no more cliffs on the sandy beach of Hilo. He jumps into the ocean, he sees this fire glistening in his eyes, and swims around Puna and lands at the place called Keauhou Pele, the canoe landing of Pele. He then goes to Waiapele, and in his human form walks up the East Rift Zone, where Pele has established her home, walking up to Kilauea. So Kamapua'a, and this story, by the way, kind of the version I'm summarizing, comes from Tutu Kauapanui of Ke'e, an amazing historian who lived from the 1860s to the 1960s, an amazing man. His Mo'opuna, Kaliko Panui, is home, I believe, now at Ke'e as a steward and caretaker of lands of the Kamehameha assets. So Tutu'ului Kaua Panui tells the story that Kamapua'a, in his body form as a human, walks up and finally arrives at Kilauea, and he looks down into Kilauea Nui, the great caldera, and there below he sees a group of women. He nui nawahine. Ho'okahi, he luahine. One is an old woman, but he gets an idea that this is the one who has the power. So he stands on the cliff of Kaniakolea, the cry of the plover, and he looks down. Eo, eyawau, okama, kehaku nevau ya oi, ka wahine o kalua. Here I am, respond to me, O woman of the pit. He calls to her, and she ignores him. Now, all of the Hi'iaka sisters, te ara me oe, ke kanaka mai ka ai mau kane, he mahina ke alo pari ke kua, o he kina. Beautiful man is up here before us. Look at him, handsome, a straight back like the cliffs, a face that radiates like the moon. There's no blemish on him. Pele finally looks at them, the sisters, and says, That's not one man, that's a pig. Oh, the sisters tell him, you got to be mistaken. Look at this guy. So finally, Kamapua gets a little bit hoo-hoo. Because she hears him sort of deriding him a bit, and she says, Ike wau ya oi? Oi no Kamapua. Yeah, I know who you are. You're Kamapua. Oi, kanakaipua oi. You're not a man, but a human. Your buttocks sort of squeak and scattered all about. Kamaipiri ka opu. Your genitals are stuck up there in your opu, not where they belong down below. And Kamapua, by this time, is so upset with her. You bleary red-eyed old hag of the pit, who are you to call me a pig and not a man? So these two akua meet in a battle. Fire versus rain and clouds and forest growth. The battle lasts for a great period of time. I believe in the traditional, to use the word carefully, legendary context. This describes in the Hawaiian mind, or in the Hawaiian experience, a period of great eruptive volcanic activity. Might we be on the verge of that again today? These two akua meet in a great battle, and finally things come to peace because Pele is at the last of her power, Kamapua at the last of his, and to save himself from the last bits of Pele's fire, turns himself into the Ama'u fern and surrounds her home, which is Hale, with that fern which is Ama'u, so Hale Ma'u. House surrounded by the Ama'u fern. Not Hale Mau. Okay? By the way, speaking of pronunciations then, just to bring you home for a moment, can you hear the difference? Kailua, kailua. Hear the difference? If you're saying kailua, you're talking about an excrement pit or a cesspool. It's important to pronounce properly. Kailua, two C's. On the side of the old dwarf was Keakua, the sea of the ghosts. On the hotel side is Kamakahonu, the eye of the turtle. Where those two currents join together, Kailua, the two C's. Thus the name. And it's only that spot right there, but now the name, like so many other Hawaiian place names around the islands, get associated and everything else gets lost, yeah? So, important. Speak the names properly. We go next, sorry. Keeping you here for a long time. So speaking about big events, this is April 1924. In April 1924, 120 some odd year eruption ended at Hale Ma'u at Kilauea. This event here threw out a boulder of 8 tons and landed on a Chinese photographer. He didn't survive, and that's true. So that's one of the reasons I flew over with some visitors today, and they were talking about problems with getting up to the park because of closures and stuff like that. I got to tell you, better safe than sorry, particularly in this Sioux Happy days, yeah? We go next. So, how did the Kupuna record their histories? First of all, maikahi pikoa, 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 piko. From one generation, one piko here, to the mother's piko here, to the child, and from child and generation to generation. But they also recorded things like in petroglyphs and things. There are amazing landscapes, lei that are just, the lei is a child, the lei is an adornment that you might wear. The lei is also your history. There's a beautiful mele that describes history, your traditions as being a lei, an adornment from the elders through the future generations as well. And so, of course, beautiful things like, Ele au, Hi'iaka calls out, so I am adorned with a lei, wearing a lei, the garlands of the misty-centered lehua, the lehua that grows along the water's edge of Hoakalei, my lehua of Hilo One. Hilo One is the sand shore area of Hilo on Hawaii. And again, just the kinds of lehua. We go, holo. Talk about wahipana. Remember when we mentioned piko? The umbilical cord? Mauna Kea is the piko that connects this island, the firstborn child of Papa and Wakea, to the heavens, the umbilical that connects it. Is it a sacred landscape? By all means. The very peak, the cluster of peaks at the top, are called Pu'uoku Kahau'ula, the hills of Ku Kahau'ula, Ku of the rosy-hued snow. Ku in the early mornings from the east side, or in the late afternoons from the west side, when rosy-hued snows come, one kupuna, they say that was Ku embracing his love, Poliahu. So you see, archaeologically, it doesn't need to be the biggest pile of bones or stones. It's also traditional landscapes, just this beautiful place that is Hawaii. Amazing things like this sit atop Mauna Kea near the 13,000 foot elevation. Lake Waiau, you want sacred water? That's it. This place is amazing. I mean, you look at the beauty, Hawaii, from the Pico, from the very summit of the mountains, through the valleys, the plains, down, Oh, look at this Ie. At one time, the Kona Mountains, Keauhou, Kahalu'u, through the Aina, when Hano's father tells me stories about going Mauka before, even here at Keauhou, the Ie was so thick that you could barely get through it, and the olona that their family would still gather, was from just so amazing. Halapepe, what an incredible plant. And again, so much of what we have that is Hawaiian is now endangered, is on the verge of extinction. Akala, the pink dyed kapas that you might see, tapa, bark cloth that you might see in museum pieces, was dyed from that plant there. And then, the views, the scenic plains are throughout the islands, just incredible places. So we will go forward. And when Hawaiians made lehulu, we're told they didn't kill the birds. They gathered them, bird catchers skilled, specialized in this. During the right time of year, molting like that, they would use a little bird lime, a gum, capture the birds in the upland forests, pick the feathers, let the birds go to another use or another time. Something like this. This is Kaliua'a on Oahu, now called Sacred Falls. Kamapua'a dug that waterfall with his foot as he was rescuing his family from the warriors of Olopana, digging with his foot down and climbing over the Ko'olau mountain. But this is an amazing landscape. A lot of people believe that Lo'ikalo, taro pond fields, were the primary source of taro throughout the islands. In reality, Kona's history is amazing. The island of Hawaii grew more dryland taro than any of the other islands put together in wetland systems. So when you get above us into the Ama'u, the forest zone, which is from Ente's residence area up, that Ama'u zone where the Ama'u ferns grew, throughout this region, the Kupuna, all the way to Ka'u, grew taro. And there are beautiful medley where the Kupuna would call out, E ka lehua kui kawau, lehua which stands in the upland forest regions, jump into your makalua, into your pit, ulu, and grow. They would call ka'i, all these different kalo by name, in chant prayers, just calling upon, inspiring the land to its productivity. Places like this on Kauai at Ke'e, amazing. The stories around Hawaii are just incredible. Storied places. We'll try and flip through. I'm sorry, I'm going to... Pu'uohulehule on Oahu, one of the noted storied places of that island. The Wilibili, an amazing tree, and of such important value and significance to the Hawaiian people, now threatened. Pili, beautiful again, plant pili. When you're planting in your yards like that, we don't, I don't know how much more bougainvillea we need, to tell you the truth. And I'm sorry, yes, it's pretty. I don't mean to offend the Kona Outdoor Circle or anybody, but, plant native. Malama pono ika aina. Care for the land. Oh, now talk about enti. Holo holo. Go for he'e, whatever's, Look at this aina here. What I love about this is at Kukio, at a place called Uluweuweu. And these ponds here are just amazing. But just as the mounds were made up at Ahuaumi, so were mounds also made within these ponds. Other natural mounds. But look at that. Scale the cliff there and get up to the top. You see the platform and the ku'ula? Now, I come to you from Lanai today, and I'm honored to be here, as I said, and please Forgive me if I mistake, but what I love is, the way the kupuna looked at the land. It was alive. It is alive. Take care of it, it cares for you. And so, the people of old loved to sing songs. In those days, of course, they were chant or mele, oli type of music that gave you, hopefully connected you, inspired you to appreciate and value. And so like this beautiful mele here. By the way, on some USDA and forestry guys' websites, the kaunaoa, the native daughter vine, is considered an invasive species and a pest, and they're urging you to get rid of it. Screw that. Pardon me. Indeed, the kaunaoa is an amazing plant and resource for us here in Hawaii. And on Lanai, I always thought that the lei of the islands was a figment of HVB's imagination. Sorry, HT, I don't mean to offend you, but in reality, the kupuna had, like at Kilauea, do you know what a lei was of Kilauea? That if you went there and wanted proof that you had been there, you would fashion a lei of pa'iniu, an endemic lily, silver backed underneath, green on the top, and it would be twined into a lei. Lei ka pa'iniu ai no oi Kilauea. Wear a lei of pa'iniu and you have been to Kilauea. On Lanai, we find in mele like this that indeed the kaunaoa was considered a traditional lei or adornment of the island there. And so kupuna call out. In ways like that, we understand that the people of old and some of our kupuna today called out to, acknowledged they loved the land, they spoke its name, and spoke of its resources, and thus were blessed in return. Mai ka ikahana akalima. When the hands do good work, the mouth eats good food. Simple traditional knowledge. Beautiful places. Again, doesn't matter if it's the biggest pile of man-made stones or the biggest pile of bones, these places all have stories and things. Sorry, I'll run through this a little bit. Amazing. Look at this. This is a story of a fisherman at Ka'upulehu. Incredible. The Opai Ula. We got to take care of this. We're losing these resources, Interestingly, we'll flip through and, the kupuna, it's interesting. If we look at it from a naturalist side of biological communities and things like that, environmental people are always lamenting the loss. Hawaii is the extinction capital of the world. 50% of what was here is now extinct. 50% of what's left is gone. We can holomua. 50% of what's left is on the verge of extinction. But you know something? I tell you this. Remember I mentioned about those epidemics and how the population of Hawaiians went from this number down to every Hawaiian today, as I said, is a survivor. In 1993, there were fewer Hawaiians alive than would fill the Aloha Stadium today. That's amazing to me, in 1893. So what happens is the kupuna have these stories. And the natural landscape was real to them, and it was alive. It was a part of their family. Natural environmental people, naturalists and don't often look at the people connection that we are a part of rather than apart from. Indeed, by specialization, unique adaptive adaptation to these island groups, the Hawaiians themselves, not the native plants, animals, birds, insects and stuff, Hawaiians themselves were the first to brink on the edge of extinction. I think that tells us something about who we are as people today, that we must be careful, that we must malama Pono ika aina. This place, stop here for a moment. Aunties, you folks from Kona, do you recognize this? Paumoa. Amazing. What would an archaeologist, without talking to a kama'aina, ever begin to know about this funny little form? And I'm sorry, the photograph isn't as great in the light because of the lighting and stuff. But that's actually the form of a dog, a natural form of a dog in a little pool on the side of Honaunau Kahauloa, right before Ki'ilai. And the story is that this dog, his name was Paumoa, eating all the chickens. Someone got hoo-hoo at him one day after stealing one too many moa. Ai no lilo oi ka pohaku. He became a stone. But he's there to this day. You know, things like this, just incredible. Everywhere you go, the landscape of Hawaii is alive and vibrant. Our challenge is how to ensure that this legacy is passed on, that we don't end it in our generation, yeah? The woman who keeps that kalo there is 98 years old now. That's her place, La Kini at Wailua on Maui, Tutuhela Nakane Lua. And she still goes to work in her auai and lo'ikalo to this day. Amazing. So, how do we find records? How do we begin to document and record history? There are many amazing resources. Family collections, historic journals, Hawaiian English language newspapers, museum, archive, library, business and historical society collections, the land records, maps, field books, and conveyance records, photographic and artist images, local, national, and international repositories, and most importantly to me, are the memories of our kupuna. They are the most fragile resource that we have with us today. Again, kupuna connect us with generations that have long since gone. We'll have, with luck, we'll have the paper and the, those kinds of resources with us for a long time. But our tutu, our kupuna, we must speak with them and appreciate them. So resources, like this is an 1824 article right out of the Missionary Herald. Missionaries came to do good and did, depending on which side of the story of good you like to be on. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be offensive, but there are important things. Onaona and I, as an example, talk about Hawaiian resources in not just Hawaiian collections, but in national collections. About 4 years ago, Onaona and I were sent by the University of Hawaii to Harvard, and we digitized thousands of records, original handwritten letters that were sent from Hawaii between 1820 to early 1900s, things that had never been back in Hawaii. The entire collection is now digitized. We can go on, please. Is entirely digitized and shares with us eyewitness accounts. While prejudiced and bigoted at times, unwittingly, they gave us an amazing resource. Amazing resource. Maps, letters like this. Sometimes reading the handwriting is a bit challenged, but we go through it. We try to transcribe the information and take things, and bring it forward so that we can understand how changes occurred from the 1820s up. I'm not going to ask you to read this now. Other things, in between the 1840s and 1950s, there was quite an amazing newspaper published here in Hawaii, mostly in English, called The Friend, the missionary rag. But it is an incredible resource documenting things that we would never know, never have access to, but we got to go read them, find them, and if you take the time, the really neat thing is, we can go to the next one. I've been going through native language accounts and historical papers from English language things for some 30 years now, and indexing it. So now what we've done is, if you want to find something, I go through my indexes and I can almost pull out every family name, most land names all across the islands. An amazing map sketched by Chester Lyman in 1846 of Kilauea. That's what it looked like at that time. Quite amazing. And then there are papers like Kahai Hawaii, published in the Hawaiian language, an amazing collection of native lore and various things. Maps dating, like this map, covering up to 1859, lava flows of Mauna Loa and Kilauea. Again, Kahai Hawaii. On the your left-hand side, mid column, first column, is a story that says, I think that's He wahi mo'olelo o kalo nui me kalo iki. A little story about Big Kalo and Little Kalo, and this is a story from Ka'u in which Big Kalo and Little Kalo are growing in the same mala'ai, in the little garden, and they hear the sound of wood being cut, and they see a fire starting to be lit, and Kalo Iki begins to tease Kalo Nui that, because of your size and how big you are, you're soon to be in the fire, but I will stay here for a while longer. But it's just a small little story from Ka'u. But these are the traditions that are handed down. This is an amazing map of Keauhou and Kahalu'u, basically giving you primary points. What's even more interesting about it is that where the points on the survey are, is that there were native witness accounts. The map is dated 1875. There are native witness accounts, native elders of Kahuahoike and Keauhou that provided the notes and the place name information around the story. Next. I was talking about field books and journals. This is an amazing, part of an amazing collection of field books by a preeminent Hawaiian surveyor, Joseph Emerson, who spoke the language fluently, and he traveled and surveyed most of South Kohala, all of Kona, Kau, through Kilauea, and just recorded amazing stories from his native informants, documenting place names that are long since lost. In fact, Kukioiki is the low section here, going into Kukionui, Kaupulehu. Kiholo is at the deep indentation there. But he lists where people were living and things, and these kinds of records are available to us. We don't need to work in a vacuum, showing trails, by then government road trail systems, and just amazing records. This is an 1892 photograph from a field book of Mauna Kea. Just incredible. And at one place on the, what would be your left-hand side page, it says burial place. There are places where it says the trails, where ceremonial sites were, naming Lilinoi, Pu'uo Lilinoi. What was interesting, though, we have a place today, as an example, up there called Pu'uo Poliahu, or Pu'u Poliahu, yeah? There was question about how some of these place names came about. What was the authority that Alexander and earlier people used in naming these locations? And we found when we went to Virginia, to the NOAA offices like that, we went through some of the original records, and we found that, in fact, then going through other notes in the National Archives, that Alexander wrote back to, now I forget his name, back to the guy who was assistant director of the NOAA and Meteorological Society, or from Washington, D.C., that he chose the name Pu'upoliahu in honor of the goddess. So its designation of that particular place, based on these records, dates from 1892. But these are still important stories to know and to pass down. An amazing map of Hilo by Baldwin, giving us all the kuleana and things. And then we have records like these. We also digitized over 60,000 records in the Mahele, royal patents, grants and things, just so that we could understand what the history of land tenure was throughout the islands. And so these are the kinds of things that you want to do. And I say this with deep respect, but if we rely only on the existing translations in the State Archives collection, we are getting information that's not always wholly accurate. In 1848, when they began, let's flip through a few of these, when they began recording the Mahele, the division of land, they began a process of inserting transcription errors. Not purposely, it just happened. A name was transposed or spelled one way in 1848, spelled another way in 1850. And so what happens is, then when the archives was going through the big translation process, sitting at a typewriter, not a computer, suddenly people names became place name became peoples. The helu, the kuleana numbers were transposed and torn off. So I've been telling attorneys, people like Mike Gibson and others, for a number of years, that I'm afraid that at some point we're going to have some real issues about, clarity of title on lands, if for no other reason than the fact that proper public notice wasn't given. When they did this public notice on quiet title actions and stuff like that, put in the wrong helu or the wrong family number or wrong family name, do the families have a way to come back and say, you know what, you failed to provide with us proper notice? This is quite amazing. I worked with Auntie and a number of kupuna. Unfortunately, Auntie's about the only survivor now of these people. But talking about these amazing lands, Hokukano, Honua Ino, on through there, Pu'uohau, notice, it shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. In 1854, right at the top of Pu'uohau, the word where the trig station is set is tomb, as an example. And the various things that go on. Look at the whole village area. You go down from Nawawa side through the Honua Ino, and then notes of survey like this. These records all exist and they're available to us. We just need to take the time and go and research them. Journals, just real quickly. Speaking of Kilauea, this is an amazing Nawahi Kalanio Pu'u. He would potentially, he was high chiefly lineage, potentially might have been king. This is his description in Hawaiian of their visit from Hilo up to Kilauea and the eruptive activity, but also notice up above Hilo Bay, Mauna Loa, this is 1882, I think, 1882 thereabouts, or 81, the eruption of Mauna Loa. So he gives this wonderful thing about his journey up to Kilauea and their journey around and how many hours it took them, the things that they saw at that time. Journals like these are incredible resources. This original journal is in the collection of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park from the old Volcano House ledgers. You know, and then historic photos. Imagine this photo was taken by a doctor who was here under Kalakaua's reign to work with the people who had maipake, leprosy. He took this photograph on the slopes of Mauna Kea, just at the forest line in the Humu'ula Hakalau vicinity. Canoe making, incredible. Then journeys to Kona, to Mauna Kea. Real quickly, the guy in the middle standing up is James Greenwell. The guy on the left, kneeling, is Raleigh Greenwell. This photograph was taken around 1932 up at the summit of Mauna Kea. I love it, you know, great stories. This is Tutumama and Tutupapa Ko'opuiki, an amazing people. Tutupapa was born in 1890, Tutumama in 1892. These are the people that inspired me to my life's path and why we're back home on Lanai now. So let's look at the faces, the storied faces of some of our kupuna. This is Cindy Punihaule's father, an amazing man. Olo. Look at that face. Incredible. She's Nu'uhiva Gomes, Ni'ihau Hawaiian with the Portuguese father. An amazing woman. Lives on Maui by herself still today. Look at that face. Ah, Uncle Moke. Ah. E no ko maho kupuna? O konane? Na maho kaia. This woman is an amazing fisherwoman. But see, Hawaiians believe that in words are the power to give life or to take it away. Use the words properly. Ola. Uncle Keola Hueu. Ah. Gone, but an amazing, amazing person. So these are the kinds of people that it's wonderful to go and talk with. We must talk story with our kupuna, with the elders. And by the way, it's not just the Kanaka, but you know, there are families with generations of residency here that help us. In our interviews, we interview Hawaiian, Japanese, Portuguese, Caucasian, Puerto Rican, you know, all of these different people that are a part of the history of Hawaii that just give us, you know, a connection with place and why things like these lokoia, fish ponds, are sacred and important. Talk about amazing people. Auntie Grace, and what an amazing weaver. Her cousin, both gone. These two, look at these faces. And going out into the field, talking story, learning about their storied and sacred places and why we should take care of the Aina. That's to Helen Nakane Lua, the Lo'ikalo at Wailua. Yeah. I love talking story with him. He gave us such amazing histories of Kona, of his growing up. And of course, Manago, I always thought, how come one Kepani get one Filipino name? Well, in reality, when his father then came in off the boat, the name wasn't Manago, was something else, yeah? But the immigration spellings got all messed up. Again, these are the kinds of sources and people that you like to go and talk story with. Uncle Kawika Kapahulehua was an amazing Ni'ihau man. Look at that face. So, talk story. It's an important one that we record and document histories and things like this. We can keep going. So, that's kind of a rough overview of why I love to do what we do. Because each time you see something like this, and real quickly, Oya paha kahopena, a ole loa, is this the end? Is this what we have to look for? I pray not. Unfortunately, this is in the uplands of Keauhou. We need to find the right balance. Yeah, how can we take care of the land? Because if we don't, it won't take care of us. So there's a wonderful old man here in Kona. Mahalo, I think that's Pau, yeah? Wonderful old man. Oh, that's our future? Yeah? Ola ka'aina, ola ke kanaka, healthy land, healthy people. Take care of our communities. Business will be healthy also. So that maybe that means we're not going bulldoze everything. Maybe we're not going to get everything we want, but if we take care, if we keep our communities healthy, businesses will be healthy, and indeed we will have a Hawaii, a future to pass on to future generations. So, okay, so